Hi, welcome back to the Weekly Why. This week we have Parsha Chukat. So this Parsha is named after kind of laws in the Torah which we see, which we don't see the rational basis for. So there are two kinds of laws. There's Chukim and there are Mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws where basically if you were making a society on your own, these are the kind of laws you would create. Don't murder, don't steal, etc., etc. Chukim are the kinds of laws which do not appear to have any rational basis, such as the red cow, which you need basically a flawless red cow, excuse me, to use for atonement. There are, you can't in your clothing have a combination of wool and linen. So there are things here which don't appear to have any logical basis. And I say appear because I think before we start, we need to have kind of an understanding of what is logical and what's not logical. Okay. Logic is understanding that a human being cannot possibly have a full understanding of the divine. Now what that means is to say, if a human being, have a certain end date, a beginning date and an end date. I'm a finite human being. I begin a certain place, I end a certain place. I have finite understanding and view of the world around me. I can only be in one place at a time, etc., etc. So I think it is not only humility, but pure logic to understand that if I am a human being, and if I believe that a God exists, a God who can create the heavens and the world, a God who is beyond time and space, surely this God can do things I do not fully comprehend. Not only is that an issue of humility, it's an issue of just pure rationality, to say that I couldn't possibly expect to understand everything that God is doing. Because if that is the case, by extension, I would understand everything God does, and therefore what exactly would make God God. So I think it's imperative here to understand that when we're talking about Chukim and Mishpatim, we're talking about laws we don't understand that have no logical basis. It's not that it has no logical basis, it's that it has something we don't yet understand, or we don't perhaps understand. But that's not a weakness. That's not saying, well, I guess I have to accept that. That's a matter of saying, thank God there are things we don't understand, because then we know that clearly here, this is something that is beyond our understanding. It's something that is clearly not the work of humans who are trying to pass off something as very logical. So just before we begin, I think it's very important to understand that mishpatim, or excuse me, chukim, any kind of laws we don't clearly understand, is an imperative if it's created by a being who is clearly of a different entire fabric than we are. So talking about the red cow. So there's a red cow, the red heifer. It's a cow which has to be basically perfect in order to, and basically you grind it up, it has to be perfect, and this atones for people. And so basically there's a number of things here, a number of issues. So one of them is that basically we can combine this to, or compare this and contrast this to the sin of the golden calf. Because basically, both of this sin of the golden calf and the red heifer, both were mixed with water and burned, and both spiritually contaminated those who came into contact with it, okay? So basically, what happens here is that same way when the Jews sinned with the golden calf, the red heifer is what atoned them. So what happens here is that we know when you sin with A, you need to use that same thing to redeem yourself. And oftentimes, that's the hardest thing. So on a deeper level, we can approach a couple other ideas. We'll compare the red heifer to the Adam and Eve. Basically, they brought death into the world, so to speak. The commentators say that prior to Adam and Eve, there was no death. And had they not sinned, the world would have gone immediately into the Messianic age. But they introduced death into the world. So basically what happened is Adam's death, in a way, was kind of rectified by acceptance of the Torah at Sinai, which basically allowed the Jewish people, allowed Judaism, morality to live forever, okay? And so in the same way, the golden calf, though, brought back death into the world. And then the red heifer comes along and fixes it. So basically, Adam and Eve, the perfect world is no death. Adam and Eve create death. And then the Sinai fixes that, and then the golden calf breaks that again, and then once again the red heifer is required to fix that. And so, but I think the deepest level here, one of the most interesting, is that Adam, the sin of Adam, was succumbing to the tree of knowledge. He wanted to know, ultimately Eve wanted to know, what really God was. This is the key here, is that the tree of knowledge here was Adam and Eve saying, it was what the snake said to Eve. He said, you know what, God doesn't want you to know these things, because that's how God is God. Because God keeps this kind of imbalance of power by keeping information kept from you. Okay? So clearly, in the matter of equality, that you need to have all the same information God has, and so therefore you'll be as powerful as God, because that is the issue here. right? The issue is to what we were talking about a minute ago is that basically what the snake said is that knowledge is power. And so if we think that we're going to understand everything, forget Judaism for a moment, but we think we're going to understand everything that a being, a divine being who created the heavens and the earth did, and if we can understand the entire rationale of the omnipotent, omniscient God, then I think that A, we believe that ourselves are God also, or B, what we're believing in a being that is not really God, because this God fits into an understanding of a 25-year-old's brain or a 35 or a 90-year-old's brain. In any case, I think it's pretty asinine and illogical thing to suggest, and I think for us to put ourselves into that perspective. But basically, getting back to the sin of the red heifer here, Adam, his sin and Eve's sin was succumbing to the tree of knowledge that God restricted. Why? Because the snake said, you will get all knowledge. In other words, you will understand these things, right? So the atonement for that haughtiness and that arrogance is an offering whose deep meaning no one can possibly understand, right? So once again, the take-home message from this is not simply that, well, there are laws in the Torah I don't understand. It's kind of like, well, it's kind of like that weird uncle that people don't talk about. It's kind of like, well, we don't understand it. It's true, but overall I understand it, so that's okay. The point is that we need to embrace the chukim as much as we embrace anything else, because once again, the chukim is an understanding, is proof to us that this is something beyond our understanding. Because if everything in the Torah was totally our understanding, if all these laws were something we could create ourselves, then we have no need for God, then we have no need for anything here, because it provides nothing more than what I can come up myself. And if that's the case, what is the need for it, and what does it offer that I can't produce myself? So once again, take-home message from this is that the chukim should be embraced as a necessary part of our understanding, that clearly the divine has more knowledge than we can possibly, and that's something we should embrace, knowing that full well there is a being who oversees all things, who loves the Jewish people, who is more powerful than we are. So that's it. Best wishes. Shabbat Shalom. God bless.